Tantor Audio presents Tabula Rasa, a crime novel of the Roman Empire, by Ruth Downie. Narrated by Simon Vance. Nescis quid vesper vehat. You do not know what the evening will bring. Macrobius, Saturnalia, Book 2, 8.2. 1. It was easy to believe that the rain threw itself at you personally. Hard not to feel persecuted and aggrieved when it found its way into your boots, no matter how much grease you slathered on them. It blew in veils across the sides of the hills, whipped along the crests, and cascaded in streams down the valleys. The river had burst its banks, and the meadows beside it mirrored the grey sky. Turf squelched underfoot, and supply carts sank into the mud, so that whole gangs who should have been building spent the short daylight hours sloshing about, clearing drains and filling potholes. Men pulled hoods over their heads to stop the wet from going down their necks, and then had to keep pushing them back to see properly. Inevitably, there were accidents. Up at the wall, the rain made earth heavier to shift and washed white streaks of fresh mortar out of the day's build. In the quarry, hammers skidded off the heads of chisels. In the camp, tools and armour went rusty overnight. Doors stuck, leather was clammy, firewood was hard to light, and bedding smelled of damp wool and mould. And then, after another long night in chilly beds, serenaded by a ragged chorus of coughing and snoring, the builders woke to an innocent morning full of birdsong. The sun rose in a sky that had been rinsed clean. Crisp views stretched for miles across hills that rolled like waves toward the north. Men nodded greetings to each other as they lifted the sides of tents and hung everything out to dry. Some even dared to hope that the worst was over. Most knew it wouldn't be. This was October, and the weather was only going to get worse. Already a strategic retreat was planned for the end of the month. The legions would march south to hunker down in their winter quarters, leaving the permanent garrison to tough it out here along the line of the Emperor's Great Wall until the next building season. If the garrison troops were bored or cold up here, there were, as the legionaries were happy to remind them, plenty of ditches to be dug. And then it happened. It was a tearing, gut-wrenching roar, like a thunderbolt crashing into the depths of the underworld and shaking the ground beneath their feet. Medical officer Gaius Petreius Ruso ducked and clamped his hands over his ears, but the cry of "earthquake" died in his throat. The noise wasn't how he remembered it. Besides, this was Britannia, not known for earthquakes, and whatever it was had stopped. Ruso and his assistant straightened up, glancing at one another, as if to confirm they had not imagined it. Beyond the stone wall, a panicked flock of sheep was racing across the hillside. Dogs had begun to bark, sounding the alarm in the surrounding scatter of native farms. Ruso bent to retrieve his medical case, wiping off the mud on the grass at the side of the track. Several loose pack ponies bolted past him, narrowly avoiding men who were sprinting down from the camp while grimy and breathless figures were hurrying up to meet them. Somewhere, over the chaos, a trumpeter was sounding the call to assemble. Ruso was already heading downhill when a wild-eyed man in a rough work tunic grabbed him by the arm. "Sir, they need a medic in the quarry!" The quarry, even when it was full of legionaries cutting stone for the Emperor's Great Wall, had always seemed relatively peaceful. The tink-tink of hammers on wedges rang out like the pecking of metal birds above the gurgling of a stream that was swollen by summer rain. Everything brought in by the army, men, tools, work-sheds, lines of plodding ponies, lifting gear, wagons, was dwarfed by the raw cliff face that loomed above them. But now, as Ruso followed the quarryman down the track to the foot of the cliff, he could see that the far end of the rock face had collapsed into a steep chaos of mud and boulders. He winced, reminded of the devastation caused by the Antioch earthquake, hundreds of collapsed buildings, voices calling for help from beneath wreckage too heavy to shift. The quarrymen were lucky. They had only just retreated to eat their midday bread and cheese in the rare sunshine when the land slipped. Another head count was being conducted, just in case. But as far as anyone knew, the quarry was now empty apart from himself, the half-dozen men of the rescue team, and one unfortunate officer. Ruso's assistant was already hurrying back up to the camp to fetch 2 sensible orderlies, a light stretcher, straps, and warm blankets. While the rescuers were checking their ropes and ladders, Ruso eyed the full extent of the slide. At the top, a couple of trees hung over the edge as if they were looking down to see where the ground had gone. Below them, torn branches and splintered wooden scaffolding poles lay on the surface or stuck out at odd angles. Several huge rocks had come to rest, part-way down the slide, as if they were waiting for some fool to free them with a careless movement, so they could tumble down and smash into the others at the bottom. Dominius, the Optio in charge, rubbed his forehead with his fist, adding another streak of grime. Then he raised the arm to point. "See that big boulder there, sir? Just past the fallen tree?" Ruso gulped. He had naively assumed that the trapped officer would be lying at ground level. Instead, the limp and muddy shape that he now saw to be a human being was lying head down on the slope, out of reach. His left leg was scraped and bloody. The right vanished under a massive lump of rock that teetered directly above him. "Are you sure he's alive?" Ruso murmured, clutching at the hope that they might be too late. The Optio called, "It's all right, sir. Hold on. The medic's here." "I don't need a bloody medic," said a voice that Ruso had never heard waver before. "Give me a knife." Ruso stared. "Pertinax?" "Prefect Pertinax, to you, Ruso." He might be seriously injured, but he was still the man who had terrified Ruso ever since one of them had been a very new medic with the 20th Legion, and the other had already reached the exalted post of second spear. "Sorry, sir." "Don't worry, sir," called Dominius. "The lads will get you down. Just hold on a moment and we'll get them organised." "I don't want—" Pertinax's voice cracked. He tried again, weaker this time. "Can't risk more men. My leg's gone." One blood-stained and filthy hand grasped vainly at the air. "Give me a knife." Dominius nodded to a man who was approaching with a dripping water skin tied to a scaffolding pole. Ruso recognized the grubby bandage around a minor sprain of the left wrist, and noted that its owner had abandoned the vanity of being blonde, since stumbling into the fort hospital a while ago with one eye full of vinegary hair-colouring. Dominius called up, "We're going to get some water to you now, sir. Try not to move about too much." "A knife!" Pertinax repeated. "That's a—" He stopped, as if he could not remember the word. "That's an order!" Dominius instructed his man in a voice too low for the prefect to hear. "Gently, eh? If anything moves, drop it and run." The no longer blond man nodded and adjusted his grip on the pole. "The water's just coming up now, sir." Pertinax groped toward the skin. Water cascaded down his face before he managed to clamp the opening against his mouth. Dominius drew Ruso aside. "You see the problem, Doctor? How long has he been asking for a knife?" "Ever since he realized how things stand." Ruso said, "If he's up there much longer, he'll die anyway. We wondered about getting a rope on and pulling him up, not if the leg's still attached." Dominius nodded, as if he had already thought of that. "Besides, the movement could bring the whole lot down on top of him." "Can you stabilize the boulder?" "It's too high to prop and too heavy for ropes, and we're not going to dig underneath to get him out." With a feeling that he was not going to like what came next, Ruso prompted, "Sir?" The Optio looked at him. "Could you cut the leg free, sir?" Ruso swallowed. "How am I going to get up there? Let alone, how am I going to perform surgery at that angle and in all that filth? And what about that huge boulder teetering over my head?" Surprisingly, white teeth showed as Dominius's filthy face spread into a grin. "That's the spirit, sir. We reckoned if we put you on a rope, you could work your way down and across. Then, once you've got him freed, my lads will come up and get him." Despite the absence of his centurion, or more likely because of it, Dominius was managing the situation with impressive calm. No wonder they said he would not be hacking rocks out of the ground for long. Just as this thought crossed Ruso's mind, an imperious voice called, "It's all right, I'm here," and the rescue party had to stop to salute Centurion Fabius's approach along the track beside the stream. Fabius's horse was being led by his personal slave. His carefully curled hair was in disarray, and he was swaying in the saddle. Ruso could smell the drink on his breath as he proceeded to apologize for being delayed, demanded a full update on the situation, and then expressed his shock and dismay. Pertinax, meanwhile, remained trapped. "We need to make a decision," put in Ruso, who thanked the gods every morning that he had been excused from sharing quarters with Fabius, and wished he had not yielded to this morning's request for medicinal wine. "We need to make a decision," agreed Fabius, lurching to the left and grabbing at the saddle for balance. He frowned at Ruso. "I don't know what's in your medicine, Doctor, but it's making me feel very odd." "It's up to you, sirs," said Dominius, looking from one officer to the other. "We could do as he asks and give the poor sod a knife." The waterskin fell from Pertinax's hand, bounced down the rubble and came to rest just out of reach. The no longer blond man poked at it with the pole, and the movement set a couple of stones tumbling down the slope. A loose trickle of earth and more stones slithered to fill the gap. Then something shifted above them, and a miniature landslide skittered downward. Everyone except Fabius stepped hastily back. It was a moment before anybody spoke again. "Try not to move, sir," the foreman called, stepping forward to retrieve the empty skin. There was no reply. "Sir?" tried Ruso. Then, "Pertinax?" A vague movement of the hand that might have been a wave. "Oh dear," observed Fabius. "He's not looking very good, is he?" "Prefect Pertinax," called Ruso, "are you sleeping on duty?" "Cold up here," came the mumbled reply. "A brave man," said Fabius. "Remarkable. Do you think cutting his wrists will work if he's upside down? Or would he have to stab himself in the heart?" "Won't be long now, sir," called Ruso, kneeling to check the contents of his medical case and trying not to think about the loose debris above him. "Keep him talking, Dominius." "If anybody goes up there," observed Fabius, gazing up at the loose slope of debris, "it should be me." But the only action following this noble thought was a hiccup. Ruso turned to Dominius. "Have someone send an urgent message to the hospital at Magnus for Dr. Valens. He needs to know his father-in-law's been seriously injured." Ruso felt a hand on his shoulder. Fabius's watery blue eyes looked deep into his own. "Good luck, Doctor. You're the only one who understands." "Go back to the fort and lie down," Ruso told him, "and no more reading. It's bad for you." Fabius nodded gravely, and with "Carry on, Optio," he allowed his slave to lead him back toward the very small fort of which he was, to the misfortune of its garrison, commanding officer. Above them, Pertinax seemed to be groping in vain for a dagger that was not there. Dominius called, "We'll soon have you down from there, sir." After they knotted the loop of rope around Ruso's chest, Dominius reached toward him and hung something around his neck. "My lucky charm, sir. Never fails. If you're in trouble, just shout and the lads will pull you out." It was kindly meant, although Ruso could not see how he would escape a further landslip unless he suddenly discovered how to fly. Glancing down at Dominius's charm lying beside his identity tag, he saw that the little bronze phallus did indeed sport a pair of wings. He hoped it was an omen. As he tied a borrowed helmet under his chin, he said, "My wife's lodging over Ria's snack bar. If I make a hash of this, you'll have to send somebody up there to tell her." 2. Ruso had picked his way crab-like across several feet of debris when he put his weight on a stone that slid away under his foot. For a heart-stopping moment there was nothing beneath him. Then the rope jerked taut around his chest. Now he was suspended, helpless, one side of his face pressed against cold rock. He forced himself not to claw against the sides and bring down more debris as he heard the stone skitter on down the slope. Praying that the men holding his rope would stand firm, he hung like a creature playing dead, feeling the cut of the rope and the thud of his heart. Somewhere, miles away, voices were asking if he was all right. Was he? He didn't know. In what way could a man who might be about to bring tons of rock down upon himself, as well as his patient, be said to be all right? He lifted his head and glanced across to where Pertinax was lying head down, eyes closed, just out of reach. The face was grey even under the grime. It was not too late to grant the mercy of an honourable suicide. The man had already enjoyed a long life and reached the pinnacle of his career. Now that he had assessed the situation from close quarters, Ruso could decide that Pertinax could not be saved. With opened wrists, the prefect would have a much quicker and cleaner death than he might have to suffer in the aftermath of dirty wounds, and everyone would say Ruso had done the right thing. Dominius was calling, "Are you all right, Doctor?" "Wait a moment." If only he had been given time to prepare for this. If only he had not wasted the morning dealing with trivia, trying to find reasons not to eat supper with his wife's dubious acquaintances, complaining about the odd disappearance of his new hospital clerk, hearing a long trail of petty grievances from men who imagined he could do something about them. He muttered a prayer to Aesculapius for the surgery and one to Fortuna for a lucky escape, and took another look. The trapped leg was visible just above the ankle. There seemed to be a second boulder beneath it, pinning it in place. The foot was probably crushed beyond repair. Only a few more inches, and Pertinax might have tumbled down the slope to safety. Now, if he were to be rescued, Ruso would have to work his way up, under the overhang of rock, and crouch there, slicing the flesh, carefully sealing off delicate blood vessels, and wielding a bone saw while he tried not to think about the weight precariously balanced above his head. Even the patient thought it was not worth the risk. As for what Tilla would say, it was usually best not to think about what Tilla would say. He thought instead about Valence's wife and their boys, and how he would no longer be an honorary uncle, but the man who had helped their grandfather to die rather than try to save him. "I'm all right," he called. Stretching up to the left, he managed to get a grip on the root of a tree that was buried in the mound of debris. "It's Ruso, sir. Nearly there now." He hauled himself up and across, feeling the muscles burning in his arm and shoulder, and tried a tentative foothold on a broken scaffolding pole. When he got there, Pertinax's eyes opened for a moment and then closed again. His face was oddly striped where trickles of water had washed the mud away. "It's Ruso, sir," he repeated, scanning for other injuries. "Can you tell me where it hurts?" He could see nothing else apart from scrapes and bruises, but then he could see very little under the muck, and he wasn't about to start cutting clothing off. "Let's get you out." He untied the rolled cloak from around his waist and draped it over the prefect's body. "I expect you're a bit cold." Faintly, without opening his eyes, Pertinax mumbled, "Go away." The prefect's skin was clammy. The man was deteriorating fast. Ruso looped the spare end of rope around the handle of his case before balancing it on the slope. He felt as clumsy as a child's dancing doll suspended on the end of a wire. "Sir," he said, opening the case and grabbing the probe that always slipped out of its clip. "Your foot's trapped between two rocks. I'm going to get you free now, and then we can go back to the fort."
"Ah, too late."
"No, sir. If we do this, there's a very good chance—"
"Kill me."
It was possible Ruso was about to do exactly that, but not in the way his patient wanted. "I can't do that, sir."
"Bloody useless. All of you."
"Yes, sir." Ruso blew away some loose grit from the skin of the unfashionably hairy leg. Searching for a topic to distract the patient, he discarded the weather as too trivial, the landslide as too frightening, and any mention of supervising the hospital as more likely to depress than inspire him. What Pertinax thrived on was challenge. "Sir, if you die, your daughter and your grandsons will be left in the care of your son-in-law."
"What?"
"Valens will be looking after the family, sir."
"Man's an idiot."
Ruso grinned. "You're absolutely right, sir." He glanced up, inadvertently clunking the borrowed helmet against the rock above them. He held his breath. Nothing happened. He let the breath out again. As if the gods were being deliberately perverse, the light changed. The sun went behind a cloud, making it even harder to see what he was doing down here, under the gloom of the overhang. The foot would be safely clamped in one place while he worked, even though it was at a difficult angle and he couldn't get underneath it properly. But if Pertinax thrashed about, he could set the whole slide in motion again. Ruso scooped away some of the muck from beneath the man's calf, then swabbed the skin with diluted vinegar. He needed an assistant up here, to hold the patient. He didn't have one. He set the dirty cloth aside, wiped his hands on a clean one, and reached for the scalpel. "Keep absolutely still for me now, sir. This might sting a bit." It was even more of a lie than usual. But what else could he say? Pertinax gasped and cried out. "Sorry, sir. Well done." He must keep him talking. "You can't go killing yourself, sir. You can't leave Valens in charge."
Unreliable.
"Exactly, sir. Here we go. Keep still now. Because if you don't, I can't tie this off and you'll bleed to death as soon as you're the right way up. Nearly done."
Dunno what she... Ah!
"Well done, sir. Not long now. Have you seen your grandsons lately?" He wiped the blood again, trying not to get mud in the wound, trying to see exactly what he was doing. A voice called, "Shall we come up, sir?" The stretcher had arrived. "No, keep clear." He took out the bone saw, swore under his breath, and wrenched off the helmet that had tipped forward over his eyes. He flung it as far behind him as he could manage, safely away from the slide. "Nearly done now, sir. You'll be free in a moment." Pertinax was rigid. His body was shaking with the effort of keeping unnaturally still when his every instinct must be to struggle and scream. Ruso felt the saw bite against the bone, and prayed. 3. It was lucky the leaves were still on the trees, or the soldiers would have seen him by now. They had been so busy running around and shouting orders that nobody had noticed a boy creeping along beside the stream until he could get near enough to see the whole of the amazing thing that had happened in the quarry. The one tied to the rope had made it across to the one who was stuck under the rock now. He moved very slowly, as if he were frightened. Edic had never seen a soldier frightened before. The one on the rope was... Edic stretched out and parted the leaves with the tip of his finger. The one on the rope was hunched up right underneath the big rock, trying to do something to the other one's... What was that in his hand? Surely he wasn't going to cut the other one's leg off. Edic felt his mouth fall open, closed it again, and swallowed. First, the dead body, and today a Roman having his leg sawn off. It was the most exciting week he could remember since the day the soldiers turned up and threw everything out of the house and called it helping. This made up for not being able to tell the others about the body. Almost. He still wasn't sure he believed in the body himself. He had been hiding in the tunnels his family's sheep had made through the thick clump of bushes. In the middle the ground still smelled faintly of sheep, even though the flock was long gone, but around the edges was the sharp stink of wee. He didn't like it. But he got used to it after a bit, and at least it meant the soldiers who were building the wall had left these bushes here to use as a latrine instead of chopping them down along with everything else. Farther down the hill, the bramble berries were finished. Everyone said you mustn't pick them past the end of September, and it was true. They were dull and shriveled. So he was even hungrier than usual. He had eaten all the cheese he had taken when Petter wasn't looking, sucking it slowly to make the taste last longer, just like Mam used to tell him. It was nearly dark now, and it was starting to rain again, and still nobody had come to look for him. The patrol had gone past and wouldn't be back for ages. He supposed he should get up and go home before Petter gave his share of supper to the dog. He was rubbing his foot to get rid of the pins and needles when he heard a gasp, a grunt. At the time he wasn't sure what it was, but it wasn't the wind in the leaves, and it was much too close. So he had shifted carefully to one side, trying to get a better view out between the tangle of rough stems. The thing grunted again. A shape was moving up the hill away from him. If it had picked up his scent, it wasn't interested. It wasn't afraid either. Too big to be a man. Too upright to be a pony or a cow. He lost sight of it, and then it reappeared up by the black line of the wall. He could see its shape against the remaining light in the sky. 2 legs. A man, then. But he was not tramping along, carrying a shield like the men on patrol. He was carrying something big and heavy on his back, something that he now let fall onto the ground. Over and over again, since then, Edic had closed his eyes and pictured that moment, trying to decide if he really could have seen a human head and an arm that flopped down as it fell. Whatever it was, it blended into the ground. The man stretched up into the rain, loosening his muscles after the strain of the carrying. Then he bent down over the new length of wall and lifted off the covers. How could he be inspecting the work in the dark? Perhaps he had lost something. He must be a soldier, because nobody else... But Edic wasn't a soldier, and he was there, so perhaps the man wasn't a soldier either. If it had been daylight, he might have run up and offered to help. It was all right to go near the troops as long as you were careful. Some of them wanted messages delivered in exchange for an apple or a taste of honeycomb, or they asked which way to go or who could sell them things. Some of them were even glad to see the local boys because they missed their own sons at home, wherever that was. Sometimes when nobody was looking, they let people travel in the ox wagons. If you said you had a big sister, you might get offered a ride home on one of the pack ponies. But Edic kept quiet about the girls at his cousin's house. He wouldn't have dared to let Dar see him with the soldiers. Not after they had turned the family off the farm and dug great trenches across the grazing. They had set fire to the houses and hacked most of the trees down for scaffolding and firewood. When one of Grandfather's tottery old friends came to sing a song to the dying trees, the soldiers shouted and threw clods of earth at him until their centurion told them to stop. Sometimes, when Edic saw the soldiers tearing the land apart, he thought that was what was happening to him, too. The man up by the wall seemed to move about as if he were working in daylight. He was bending to pick up filling stones from the pile. Usually the soldiers built up both sides of the wall with rows of the big square stones that they had cut out of the hillside, and then they filled the gap in the middle with things nobody would see, rough stones and clay and sand and, sometimes, when the officers weren't looking, lumps of turf. But that day the rain had got worse. When it rained like that, it washed the wet mortar out and left white streaks down the outsides of the stones, so the centurion had come and told them to stop before they filled the middle in. Edic had watched them pack up their tools and heard the centurion telling them to make sure they covered the sides up properly before they marched back to the camp. Then he had stayed up there and seen the man carrying the thing that looked very much like a body, and when the wind dropped he could hear the familiar thump and clunk of stones being thrown onto a pile. Up there in the dark and the drizzle, all on his own, the man was filling in the middle of the wall. The filling in seemed to go on for a long time, and Edic's thoughts had drifted to his dinner, and the dog, when he realized the man wasn't there any more. This time he heard the footfalls. He held his breath as they came down the hill toward his hiding place. Then a cry and a curse, and all the bushes shuddered and spattered raindrops. There was the pale shape of a hand, so close that he could have reached out and touched it. Edic narrowed his eyes and kept as still as a hunter. The hand lifted. The bushes shook again, and the man was back on his feet and away much too quickly for anyone carrying anything heavy. Whatever it was, he had left it up there. Even after days of thinking about it, Edic did not understand what he had seen. But when he thought about telling anyone, the squirming in his stomach told him not to. This was the first time in days that he had managed to sneak away from his chores for another look, but he was not even sure where the body was now. The soldiers had built up lots more rows of stones and filled in the gap between them. This stretch of wall was too high to see over. He had been about to run back to the cousin's house before anybody started to wonder why he was taking so long to find firewood, but then came the terrible noise from somewhere down in the valley, beyond the soldiers' road. And now here he was, seeing the rock all tumbled down and a blood-stained and muddy old man struggling and crying out as the other one was trying to cut his leg off while all the others watched.
Hey!
Edic jumped at the sound and grabbed the branch to steady himself.
Yes, you!
The voice shouted in Latin.
What are you doing up there?
But by the time the soldier got there, Edic was down the tree and gone. 4. The patient's family had given Tilla 2 hard-boiled eggs, fresh bread, and a cup of warm milk, with the usual warning about not drinking the water from the stream. It was kindly meant, but she'd been here for most of the summer and heard it a dozen times before. If you wait long enough, the muck from the building work all sinks to the bottom, but no matter what the soldiers tell you, everyone knows they piss in it. That was the trouble with soldiers, Tilla thought, stepping aside onto the grass verge to let a couple of carts rumble past, and glancing up to where small figures were moving around on the scarred hillside. You couldn't trust them. Her anger rose again as she remembered the plump girl's anxious insistence that her injuries were nothing. She had tripped and banged her head on the doorpost and then fallen awkwardly. She did not need a healer. She just needed to rest for a while. She was sorry for all the fuss. Tilla had done her best to be gentle as she set the broken fingers straight, but Kata still cried out in pain. "Your mother tells me this sort of thing has happened before." Kata sniffed. "I'm very clumsy." Tilla laid the compress over the grazed and swollen cheek. You're lucky none of the bones of your face are broken. The girl kept her eyes closed, like a child who wanted to be invisible.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?